Chapter 4, Part 1, Origins, War, and Peace on Nibiru. The Origin of Nibiru, and Its People. By Seth Lyon. 2.5 million years ago, around the same time that the Maldek, Mars war was erupting in our solar system, the Anunnaki were getting into some trouble over in the Orion sector. Remember back to their origin during the Orion Wars. They were created as a race from the union between the leaders of the Federation and the Empire, and from the beginning it was their mandate to be leaders as well. The fact that they were eventually rejected by the galaxy, largely because of the reptilian side of their heritage, left them with a pretty big chip on their collective shoulder. So when the Orion War finally did end, and Tiamat, who has her share of reptilian DNA, as well, she is called the Dragon Queen for good reason, was given governorship over both our region of space as well as Orion, the Anunnaki were righteously pissed off. This bitterness festered until, in an excess of hubris and stupidity, they launched an attack on Tiamat's home planet, and were easily defeated by the much larger and more advanced forces of the Dragon Queen. Tiamat could have easily wiped out the Anunnaki, but she is both an enlightened and merciful ruler. I'm using the present tense here to refer to Tiamat, because she is still around, and she magnanimously offered a peace settlement to the little warrior dwarves. Even though the Anunnaki were bigger than us, 10 to 14 feet tall, they were indeed dwarfed by Tiamat, and her race of dragon, human hybrids who are 50 to 60 feet tall. Part of the peace treaty was a symbolic marriage between the leader of the Anunnaki, and Tiamat. Their genetic materials were mixed to create 12 crossbreed children, 6 male, and 6 female, who were 30 to 35 feet tall, and had both reptilian and humanoid attributes. These children were gifted to be his loyal servants, and their descendants would become the Igigi, the giant worker race of the Anunnaki. Some of the creatures from Greek history were descended from the Igigi, such as the Cyclopes, and the hundred-handed ones. Over in our neck of the woods the Maldek, Mars war was at an end, but the system was still in trouble. Up until this time our system had actually been a binary star system, as are many solar systems that have life-sustaining planets, and this resulted in a higher vibrational state than currently exists. However, the vibration of the consciousness grid in Sol had become so lowered by the trauma of war and the destruction of Maldek that there was a vibrational incompatibility between the consciousness of the system as a whole and the energy of the binary suns. It was basically just too much light for the darkness of that time, and there was great danger that this dissonance could eventually lead to an imbalance great enough to cause disaster. To help correct this imbalance, for which they were partly responsible, engineers from the Pleiades arrived to help save the day. Working in the 6th density, they lowered the vibration of our second sun, siphoning off energy and plasma, and using it to create 2 other heavenly bodies. With the raw material taken from that second sun they built a blue dwarf star, Illinian, and, rotating around it, a reddish planet with a molten core that would become known as Nibiru. These red and blue heavenly bodies would also become known as Red Kakina and Blue Kakina by the Hopi people. They set Nibiru and Illinian in a long, elliptical orbit, swinging around the dual foci of Sol and another star far outside our solar system once every 3,600 years. Our original second sun became the planet we call Saturn. There are many, many myths in ancient lore about Saturn once being our sun, and it is still worshipped today as the dark sun by various groups. The Pleiadian engineers then crashed a couple comets into the crust of Nibiru, and got some water and oxygen going, and the resulting atmosphere of Nibiru was held in by a blanket of cloud and particulate belched forth from the continuously erupting volcanoes on the surface, which also filtered the radiation from Illinian. Though Nibiru is not a watery planet like ours, It was made so that it could support oxygen-breathing life forms. The star at its heart still generated enough heat internally that, combined with the warmth from Alanin, it was able to support life even at its furthest point from Sol. Now all that was needed was a race of people to inhabit the planet, and it just so happened that Tiamat, the Dragon Queen, knew just the folks who should go there, the Anunnaki. By giving custodianship of the planet to the Anunnaki, she gave them something they wanted, governorship of our region of space, and she also got something she wanted, a nice, out-of-the-way place to put the troublesome warrior race. The Anunnaki colonized Nibiru at a time when it was still very far away from our solar system, closer to their home system of Sirius. The intention was for the Anunnaki to become a group of warrior guardians, who could keep an eye out for the kind of strife that had so recently brought our system to the brink of collapse. Unfortunately though, as a result of their mixed genetic heritage, the Anunnaki already had rifts and resentments within their own culture, rifts that had never really closed since their inception during the Orion Wars. As they traveled through space on their new home, getting closer and closer to our own solar system where the vibration had already been lowered by the casting out of Lucifer and his followers in the War of Heaven, and by all the suffering and destruction of the Maldek, Mars Wars, these rifts in their culture widened into cracks. During these early days, the Anunnaki civilization on Nibiru became a culture divided against itself, with those more inclined towards their Federation roots in the north, and those that leaned towards the ideals of the Empire in the south. The society at that time resembled a mix of tribal, medieval, and space-age technologies, with warring royal families, castles, and swords, and magic, etc. As well as the various laser blasters and missiles that had survived down through the generations. They also still had many weapons of great terror, as they are referred to in the Sumerian clay tablets, which were basically nuclear warheads, the use of which was considered taboo by all the tribes. These nukes would survive down through the millennia, stored and preserved in stasis fields, and become shrouded in mysticism and myth, and some of them would eventually find their way down to our own planet, a couple million years later. By the time Nibiru swung through our planetary system for the first time, the Anunnaki were in no shape to keep an eye out for anyone but themselves, and such would be the case for many, many generations to come. Note: from this point on, all the history concerning the Anunnaki comes from actual recorded documents. I primarily used a lost book of Enki by Zecharia Sitchin, distinguished Orientalist and biblical scholar. He is one of the few people alive who is able to read and translate the Sumerian clay tablets, among other ancient texts. The Lost Book of Enki was Mr. Sitchin's presentation of this story, which he compiled from ancient clay tablets and other artifacts unearthed in various archaeological digs. Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Hittite, Egyptian, Canaanite, and Hebrew sources are all woven together to create this narrative. Rather than detracting from the story's veracity, it is my opinion that the fact that all these various sources dovetail with each other and speak to the same events increases the likelihood that these events did, in fact, occur. Plus my gut says yes. 775,000 years ago, for more than 1.5 million years, while life on Earth has been flourishing and slowly evolving under the gentle guiding hand of the Nakals, life on Nibiru has been one of repeated cycles of war, destruction, rebuilding, and then more of the same. Many cities have been built, destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again. Civilization has risen to heights that surpass our current level of technology, and have also been plunged back into the Stone Age from devastating conflict. But finally, there was peace. In an unconscious repetition of their ancient origin as a species, the two major tribes of the Anunnaki drew by lot, one from the north, a man given the name and title Un. Another repetition from ancient times, Un was also the name of the ancestor who made peace with Tiamat, and one from the south, a woman titled Untu, to be their king and queen, and to establish one united royal bloodline. A lot had changed in the Anunnaki culture by the time this peace was reached. They had forgotten their connection to a larger cosmic brotherhood, and their origins on Nibiru had become shrouded in myth and legend. However, throughout the following several 100,000 years of peace and stability, they would regain much of what they lost in terms of technology and consciousness. There were still some ancient nuclear warheads around, the weapons of great terror, stored in stasis fields, the use of which was taboo, as well as some computers and laser technology, all of which had become like holy relics, preserved and honored with ritual. Through studying these technological remnants, Anunnaki scientists were able to start progressing in the development of science and technology once again. The surrounding intergalactic community, who followed a policy of non-intervention at the time, left them to their own devices. It wouldn't be until the Anunnaki came and set up shop on Earth, many hundreds of thousands of years later, that they would be reintroduced to the knowledge of their long-lost space family through war with the Draco on the Moon, and interaction with the Nahkals and Lord Sanat Kumara on Earth. But at the time, as far as they knew, they were alone in the universe. 497,000 years ago, the Anunnaki civilization was in trouble. The cold times of the planet were getting colder, and the hot times hotter, because of breaches in the thinning atmosphere of the planet. This is, because the volcanoes that had been generating the particulate matter that helped to seal in the atmosphere, and filter the radiation from millennia, were dying out. The heat from the molten core had fueled the volcanoes for a long time, but it was failing. Crops were failing too, and infertility had begun to spread among the people, including the current royal couple, Duru and Doru. The chain of lineage that descended down from Un and Antu was broken when, instead of procreating, Duru and Doru adopted a child named Lama, who inherited the throne. In the reign of Lama, two solutions to the declining atmosphere were proposed. The first was that gold should be mined from the Hammered Bracelet, the asteroid belt that was once Maldek. Gold, it had been found, was the only mineral that could be ground fine enough that it would stay suspended in the atmosphere, acting as a shield. Or two, that nuclear warheads be launched into the dormant volcanoes in attempt to reignite their eruptions. Lama was indecisive, and weak-willed, though, heeding only his wife's advice that they should pray to the great creator of all for an answer. 4 shars, the Nibiru year, one of which equals 3,600 Earth years, went by, and the unrest in the population only grew as the deprivation and blight got worse. Eventually, disgusted by Lama's lack of action, one prince named Alalu decided to take the throne for himself. He led a band of fellow princes and soldiers who stormed the palace, and Lama was thrown to his death from the highest tower by Alalu, who, incidentally, was an incarnation of Lucifer. Even though Lama was largely despised, there was much turmoil caused by the murder of the king at the hands of this usurper, and Alalu was brought before the council so that they could question him. Alalu claimed the right of kingship, because he was descended from An, through the firstborn son of King Anshargil. This ancestor was sired on a concubine though, and had lost his right to the throne when the law of the seed, he with the most royal genetic material inherits, supplanted the law of succession, the firstborn son inherits, many shars ago during King Anshargil's reign. Alalu claimed that this implementation of the law of the seed was a cruel manipulation by Queen Gishargil, who was the king's own half-sister, a law which she pushed forward solely so that her son would inherit. it was Alalu's argument that he must inherit the land, and restore the nobility of the line of Un. Upon hearing this, another prince, named Anu, stepped forward, also claiming that he was descended from Un, through his youngest son, Nibiru. He also claimed the right to the throne. There was much debate, and indecision, with the council siding about half, and half with each prince, but then Alalu proposed a solution. He embraced Anu as a brother, and declared that they should work together as equal descendants of Un. If Anu would let Alalu be king, then Alalu would make Anu the heir. They agreed, and Alalu proclaimed that Anu would be his cupbearer and crown prince. To further cement their union, it was decreed that Alalu's daughter would be wed to Anu's son. Alalu became king, and ordered the construction of a fleet of mining vessels, which were to bring back the badly needed gold from the asteroid belt, but he underestimated the dangers of attempting to mine gold in such perilous territory, and the fleet was mostly destroyed by the hammered bracelet, the asteroid belt formed from the shattered remains of Maldek. He then tried the second solution, and ordered that some of the weapons of Great Terror be taken from their stasis fields, and launched into the core of the volcanoes, in the hope that this might reignite their internal combustion. But this too failed, and 9 long shars of Alalu's rule followed, a time of increasing discontent and suffering, during which the people of Nibiru ceased to revere the king who was failing to save them as he had promised. Finally, convinced that he must step up to save his people, Anu challenged Alalu to unarmed single combat. Both men were skilled warriors, and the battle was long, but eventually Anu won, so Alalu, fearing that he would suffer the same fate as the despised Lama, whom he himself had murdered, fled out of the city to the spaceport, where he launched his ship into the stars.